Clara Bennett had never imagined that her life at 18 would be reduced to a matter of survival. Her family's farm was failing, debt stacked like high, unyielding walls, and her parents' weary faces betrayed a desperation that words could not fully convey. Every night, they whispered about money owed, about creditors who would come calling, and about a future that seemed to slip further from their grasp. Clara knew she had to do something, anything, to protect her family, but the price they were asking her to pay made her stomach twist with dread. It was her mother who first suggested it, her voice trembling yet firm. "There's a widower, a rancher with 3 children. He's looking for a companion, someone to help him at home. They say he's kind, but he's alone. He needs a wife, Clara. We need this." The words hung in the air like a noose. Clara's heart pounded. She had always imagined love as a gentle thing, a connection between equals, not a transaction where her youth and innocence were bargaining chips. And yet, the harsh reality pressed down. Her family's survival might depend on her willingness to marry a man she had never met. Her father avoided her gaze, pretending not to notice the tears forming in her eyes. "We don't have a choice, Clara. The farm will be lost if you don't. If we don't do this." His voice, usually commanding and steady, faltered, betraying a helplessness that no daughter should see. Clara felt a surge of anger and frustration. Why must her life be the solution to their problems? Yet beneath that anger was fear. Fear of the unknown, of leaving her home, and of what life might demand of her once she stepped into the role of a wife and mother figure to children she had never met. Word of the arrangement had already begun to stir in the village. Whispers followed her down narrow streets, carried by eyes that lingered too long and tongues that wagged too freely. "She's still a virgin. They're giving her to him." The gossip pierced her, 1,000 tiny knives, each one sharp with judgment. Clara hated the thought of being viewed as property, as someone whose worth could be measured in purity and obedience. But there was no argument she could make, no rebellion that could overturn the heavy hand of circumstance pressing upon her family. And yet, beneath the fear, there was a flicker of curiosity. Who was this man she was to marry? What kind of life awaited her on a vast ranch, away from the small village she had always known? Would the children welcome her or see her as an intruder? Clara wrestled with conflicting emotions, resentment at her lack of choice, worry for the unknown, but also a quiet, stubborn hope that perhaps life could hold something unexpected, perhaps even kindness. The day of departure was tense. Clara packed her belongings with trembling hands, every item a reminder that she was leaving not only her home, but the life she had known. Her mother clutched her hand, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. Her father's hug was brief, almost mechanical, but the pressure of his arms carried the unspoken apology of a man who knew he was sending his daughter into uncertainty. Clara's heart ached with the weight of responsibility, shame, and fear, yet also with the strange, sharp thrill of stepping into a life unknown. As she climbed into the wagon that would take her to the McAllister Ranch, Clara took a deep, steadying breath. She could not undo the past, nor could she predict the future. All she could do was move forward, carrying with her the hope that she could navigate this new life with courage, dignity, and perhaps even a measure of happiness. The road stretched out ahead, dusty and uncertain, and with every mile, Clara felt the old world slipping away, replaced by a strange, daunting promise of change, one that would alter her life in ways she could never have imagined. The wagon creaked beneath the weight of Clara's small trunk and her anxious thoughts as it rattled down the uneven dirt road. Outside, the landscape stretched wide and lonely fields of dry grass, scattered trees, and distant hills that seemed to rise endlessly into the sky. Clara pressed her hands to her lap, fingers intertwined, as if holding on to herself could provide some measure of comfort. Each mile carried her farther from the home she had always known and closer to a life that was entirely unknown. Her parents rode ahead, their figures framed against the fading afternoon light. Clara's mother, usually so composed, sat with her chin resting on her hand, eyes fixed on the road as if willing it to shorten. Her father, silent and tense, guided the horses with a tight grip, never looking back. Clara felt a pang of guilt. She had always imagined leaving home on her own terms after finishing school, after learning more of the world, but now she was leaving under a shadow of obligation. Every bump in the road reminded her of the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The thought of the McAllister Ranch made her stomach churn. She had heard snippets from the village stories of the widower, a man respected for his hard work but feared for his stern demeanor, raising 3 children on his own. The children were said to be wary of strangers, protective of the memory of their mother, and loyal only to their father. Clara had no idea how she would be received, or if she would even be able to connect with them. She swallowed hard, trying to imagine herself in a place so different from the modest, cramped life of her own home. The road twisted into a long, dusty trail flanked by fences that marked the boundaries of other farms. Clara gazed out at the endless horizon, imagining the ranch she was heading toward a sprawling property, barns, stables, and acres of land that demanded constant labor. She could picture Daniel McAllister, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes that seemed both piercing and weary. She did not know if he would be kind or cold, patient or demanding. Her mind painted him in contradictory shades, a man of mystery she had yet to meet. As the wagon bumped over a particularly rough stretch, Clara's mother spoke quietly, as though saying the words aloud would make them real. "Be kind, Clara. He's lonely, and the children, they miss their mother. You must understand that this is not just about you or him, it's about creating a home, a family." Clara nodded silently, her throat tight. She knew she had to try, but fear clung to her like a second skin. She had no idea if she could live up to the expectations placed on her, or if she would be able to protect her own heart in the process. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional word from her father or the soft clop of the horses' hooves. As the sun began to sink behind the hills, casting a golden haze over the fields, Clara spotted the first signs of the ranch, a distant line of trees marking the driveway, the roof of a large house peeking over the horizon, and the outline of barns and corrals. Her heart beat faster, a mix of excitement and terror. This was the world she was about to enter, a world that promised both possibility and challenge, love and difficulty in equal measure. Finally, the wagon rolled to a stop in front of the McAllister home. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady the fluttering in her chest. The house was larger than she had imagined, sturdy and weathered, surrounded by the quiet hum of rural life. Somewhere inside, a man and 3 children waited, unaware of the storm of emotions she carried with her. Clara climbed down from the wagon, legs stiff from sitting, and looked up at the door. The first step into her new life was before her, and there was no turning back. With a trembling hand, she lifted her knuckles to knock, knowing that in that moment, everything would change. Clara's knuckles hovered over the heavy wooden door, her heart hammering like a drum in her chest. She had imagined this moment countless times during the long journey, yet reality was nothing like the rehearsed scenarios in her mind. The door swung open, revealing a man taller than she had expected, broad-shouldered, with hair flecked by early streaks of gray. His eyes, deep and steady, met hers with a mixture of curiosity and guarded caution. "Clara?" His voice was calm, measured, yet carried an authority that made her straighten instinctively. Daniel McAllister, so the village had said, was a man of few words and even fewer emotions displayed. Clara offered a small, tentative nod, unsure what was expected of her. Behind him, 3 children appeared, their expressions a mixture of wariness and curiosity. The eldest, a girl of 12 named Sophie, stood with arms crossed, her chin tilted slightly upward as if daring Clara to make a mistake. Next to her, Luke, 10, kept his gaze on the floor, fidgeting with the hem of his sleeve, clearly uncertain how to round a stranger. And the youngest, 7-year-old Emma, clutched a small doll tightly to her chest, peering from behind her father as if seeking protection. The first moments were heavy with silence. Clara swallowed, her throat dry. She had expected warmth, or at least a semblance of welcome, but the air felt thick with caution. Daniel's eyes scanned her from head to toe, evaluating without judgment, but with undeniable scrutiny. Clara felt herself shrinking under his gaze, acutely aware of every imperfection, every uncertainty she carried. I'm here to help," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "With the house? The children? Whatever you need." The words sounded braver than she felt, but they were the only offering she could make in this strange new territory. Daniel nodded once, curtly, his expression unreadable. "We'll see. Dinner will be ready soon. Then we'll talk about chores." It was not unkind, but it was far from the welcoming embrace Clara had secretly hoped for. She realized quickly that this household ran on order, discipline, and routine, not idle niceties. The children watched her every move, eyes sharp and discerning. Sophie's arms remained crossed, but her gaze softened ever so slightly when Clara knelt to gently greet Emma, who had been hanging back. Clara's smile was careful, tentative, but honest, and Emma's tiny hand reached out slowly, almost experimentally, to touch hers. That small gesture felt monumental. Luke remained reserved, his expression guarded, but Clara could sense his mind working, evaluating whether she was friend or foe. As they walked inside, Clara tried to take in her surroundings. The house was large, functional, and well-kept, but it lacked the warmth of a lived-in home. There were signs of children everywhere, toys carefully stored, books lined on shelves, and photographs of a woman she assumed was the children's late mother. The family's grief was palpable, hanging over the household like a shadow. Clara felt a pang of sympathy and fear. She would have to navigate this delicate balance carefully if she were to earn their trust. Dinner was quiet, the clinking of silverware punctuating the gaps in conversation. Clara did her best to engage, asking Sophie about school, Luke about the animals, and Emma about her doll, but the children's responses were clipped, cautious. Daniel observed quietly, occasionally offering a short comment or correction, setting boundaries without overt hostility. Clara realized this was the rhythm of her new life, slow, careful, a dance of patience and observation. As the meal ended and the children were ushered to bed, Clara stood alone in the kitchen, washing dishes in silence. She allowed herself a single deep exhale. The first impressions were harsher than she had hoped, the walls thicker, the scrutiny heavier, but she also glimpsed small openings, Emma's tentative smile, Sophie's softened gaze. It was enough to give her hope. Clara knew this household would not yield easily, but for the first time she felt a spark of determination. She would find a way in, one careful step at a time, and perhaps in time this cold, guarded place could become something resembling home. The morning light crept through the large kitchen windows, casting a warm glow over the wooden floors and well-worn countertops. Clara rose early, determined to face her new life head-on. The first night had been a tense introduction, filled with silence, measured glances, and subtle tests of her composure. Now, with the sun spilling across the ranch, she knew it was time to prove herself, not just to Daniel, but to the children and, perhaps most importantly, to herself. Her day began with chores. The barn loomed in the early light, its doors wide open like the mouth of some great beast waiting to test her courage. Clara approached cautiously, taking stock of the animals. Horses with glossy coats, cows with wary eyes, and chickens that scattered at the slightest movement. She recalled the lessons Daniel had given during the briefest of instructions the day before, and though her hands trembled as she lifted hay bales and tended to the animals, she found a rhythm. Sweat pricked her brow, but a strange satisfaction surged through her as she realized she could handle this life one task at a time. Breakfast was a quieter affair than dinner had been. Clara prepared eggs, toast, and fresh milk, careful to present the food neatly. The children watched her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Sophie, ever cautious, observed her from across the table, arms folded as if daring Clara to falter. Luke's eyes lingered on her hands as she poured the milk, and Emma shyly hovered by her father's side, peeking from behind the kitchen table. Clara forced a smile, her nerves still taut, but the act of cooking and serving filled her with a sense of purpose she had never known. Over the next few days, Clara began settling into a routine. She learned to tend the garden, clean the house efficiently, and manage the daily needs of 3 children grieving in different ways. Each success, taming a stubborn horse, baking bread that rose perfectly, or soothing a crying child added layers to her confidence. She found herself quietly admiring Daniel, the way he moved around the ranch with steady authority, yet rarely raised his voice unnecessarily. He seemed to notice her efforts too, though his acknowledgment was subtle, a nod, a rare compliment, a glance that lingered a fraction longer than politeness required. The children, initially reserved, began testing her limits in small ways. Sophie would challenge her with questions or opinions, her sharp tongue a shield against the fear of attachment. Luke's rebellion was quieter but persistent, a refusal to accept someone new into his carefully structured life. Emma, the youngest, offered tentative smiles and small acts of trust. A hand held, a drawing presented, a shy giggle shared. Clara met each interaction with patience, understanding that winning their trust required consistency, kindness, and quiet strength. By the end of the week, small victories began to accumulate. Sophie asked for her help with the sewing project, Luke accepted guidance on horseback riding, and Emma chose to sleep in her new bed without clutching her doll for comfort. Clara felt a warm swell of pride and relief. These were the first signs of connection, fragile as they were, but real. She realized that her role in this household was not just to manage chores, but to be a steady presence, a source of reassurance in a world that had shifted dramatically for everyone involved. Daniel began to take notice in subtle ways. He observed her problem-solving skills, her empathy toward the children, and her resilience under pressure. He made small gestures of trust, like asking for her opinion on daily decisions or allowing her to manage certain tasks independently. For the first time, Clara sensed that she was not just a temporary caretaker or a solution to a family problem. She was becoming part of the fabric of this home. As the sun set over the sprawling ranch, Clara stood on the porch, watching the children play in the yard, their laughter mingling with the creaking of the old swings. Exhausted but fulfilled, she realized that she was no longer just an outsider in this house. She was a part of something larger, something fragile and new, yet full of promise. The journey had only just begun, but Clara felt, for the first time, a quiet certainty that she could navigate this life with courage, heart, and determination, and that, perhaps, this place could someday feel like home. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with the scent of damp earth and hay lingering in the air. Clara had already begun her chores, humming softly to herself as she swept the barn and fed the animals. It was a rhythm she had grown accustomed to, yet today carried a tension she could not shake. Daniel had set out early with the children to check the distant fence line, leaving Clara alone with the farmyard, and for the first time, the weight of absolute responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. The day had barely begun when a sudden commotion broke the quiet. One of the horses, startled by a coyote at the edge of the pasture, bolted, dragging its lead rope across the ground. Clara's heart leapt into her throat as she dashed after it, her hands gripping the rope, trying desperately to slow the animal before it collided with the fence. Dust swirled around her, and the horse neighed in panic. She felt herself slipping, fear threatening to overtake her, when strong hands suddenly joined hers on the rope. "Hold it steady," Daniel barked, his voice calm but commanding, and together they managed to guide the horse back into the stall. Clara's chest heaved, her hands trembling, but a spark of exhilaration coursed through her veins. For the first time, she had faced a real challenge alongside Daniel, and together they had succeeded. His eyes met hers, a flicker of approval hidden beneath his stoic demeanor, and Clara felt a strange warmth, as if a bridge had been quietly built between them. The children returned shortly after, curiosity and concern etched on their faces. Sophie, who usually held herself apart, approached first. "Are you okay?" she asked cautiously, her voice betraying a hint of admiration. Luke nodded silently, and even Emma ventured closer, her small hand brushing Clara's arm in tentative comfort. Clara smiled, feeling a swell of pride. Not only had she proved herself capable, but she had earned a sliver of the children's trust in the process. Later, as they worked together to repair a broken fence, Daniel began to speak more openly than Clara had ever heard him. He shared stories of his late wife, of the joys and struggles of raising 3 children alone, and of the fears he had carried since her passing. Clara listened quietly, offering small reassurances, nods of understanding, and the occasional word of comfort. In these moments, the walls that had seemed impenetrable between them began to crumble, replaced by a tentative, fragile connection grounded in mutual respect. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch, they paused to rest, leaning against the fence. Daniel handed Clara a glass of water, his fingers brushing hers briefly, a simple gesture, yet one that sent an unfamiliar thrill through her chest. She realized that this man, who had seemed so distant and unapproachable, was beginning to trust her. He was letting her see the man behind the rancher, the father behind the authority figure, and she, in turn, felt a deepening confidence in her own strength and place within this family. The children watched the interaction quietly, sensing the subtle shift in the household. Sophie's defensive posture softened further, Luke's guarded demeanor eased, and Emma's shy smiles became more frequent. Clara recognized that these small signs of acceptance were milestones, not just in her relationship with the children, but in the delicate bond forming between her and Daniel. By the end of the day, Clara stood on the porch once more, the evening sky painted in shades of orange and pink. She felt a quiet, profound satisfaction. She had faced danger, worked alongside Daniel, and glimpsed the man beneath the stoic exterior. In return, she had been seen, acknowledged, and in small but meaningful ways, trusted. The first real bond had been forged, an unspoken understanding that they could rely on each other, not merely as employer and caretaker, but as partners navigating the uncertain terrain of life, love, and family together. The days at the ranch had begun to settle into a careful rhythm. Clara had found her place among the chores, the children, and the subtle routines of ranch life, and even Daniel's occasional acknowledgments of her efforts had started to feel like genuine acceptance. Yet the fragile peace of their little world was not to last. Word, as it often does in small towns, had begun to travel faster than the wind, reaching ears that had long been waiting to judge. Clara first sensed it in the cautious glances of villagers when she ventured into town for supplies. Eyes lingered too long, whispers followed her down the narrow streets, and lips curled into half-smiles that reeked of gossip. "She's still a virgin," one woman murmured to another, as if speaking the fact aloud could somehow tarnish Clara further. "Living with a widower, wonder what she's doing out there?" Clara's stomach churned. The word struck her with a sharp, unexpected force. She had known people would talk, but hearing it, feeling it directed at her, felt like an invisible weight pressing on her chest. The comments reached Daniel as well, though not all at once. One afternoon, a visiting neighbor stopped by, ostensibly to deliver supplies but clearly aiming to pry. He dropped hints, casual questions about Clara's life and intentions, all while judging the family's choices. Daniel listened in silence, his jaw tightening as the man's gaze lingered too long on Clara. When the visitor finally left, Daniel's eyes found Clara's, a flicker of apology and frustration in his normally stoic expression. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "They don't know the first thing about us," but Clara could see the tension etched in his features, the rare hint of vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior. At night, as Clara lay awake in her modest bedroom, she felt the sting of judgment more acutely. The whispers of the village, the insinuations, and the assumptions seemed to follow her into her dreams. She questioned herself constantly. Was she doing the right thing by staying? Could she truly earn the children's trust and Daniel's respect if the town continued to cast her as an intruder, a temptress, or a mere solution to someone else's loneliness? Her doubts were a relentless companion, a shadow she could not shake, no matter how brightly the morning sun shone over the ranch. Daniel, however, proved unexpectedly protective. The next morning, he arranged for Clara to have less contact with the nosy villagers, running errands himself when possible and speaking to townsfolk with a quiet authority that left little room for speculation. Yet the gossip persisted, relentless and invasive. Clara realized that life at the ranch would not exist in isolation. The outside world, with its rigid expectations and judgment, would always loom. It was a reality she had to learn to navigate, alongside the already challenging tasks of adapting to a new family and a new way of life. Despite the pressure, Clara found solace in small victories within the walls of the ranch. The children's trust grew, the animals responded to her care, and Daniel's glances became softer, more approving. She discovered an inner strength she had not known she possessed, a quiet resilience that allowed her to rise above the village gossip, even when it stung. She began to understand that the bonds she was forging at the ranch were far more important than the whispers of outsiders, that trust, love, and family were built on shared experience, not public opinion. By evening, Clara stood on the porch, looking out at the fading light over the fields. The wind carried the distant murmur of the village, but she no longer felt it pressing on her chest. Instead, she felt a cautious optimism. Yes, there were outside pressures and judgmental eyes, but here on this ranch with Daniel and the children, she had a place, and that place, she realized, was worth defending. The gossip could not reach them here, not truly. And that thought, fragile yet steady, gave her the courage to face the days ahead with renewed determination. Life on the McAllister Ranch had settled into a rhythm that, though demanding, began to feel familiar to Clara. She rose before dawn, moved through her chores with practiced efficiency, and found herself anticipating the small, quiet interactions that had become the fabric of her daily life. The children had grown more comfortable around her. Sophie no longer folded her arms at breakfast. Luke asked questions about the farm, and Emma no longer clung nervously to her doll, but often sought out Clara's company. These small victories filled Clara with a sense of belonging she had never imagined possible. But it was Daniel's presence that lingered most in her mind. At first, his authority had seemed impenetrable, his stoic demeanor a wall she could never scale. Now, she began to notice the subtle ways he trusted her with decisions, the small gestures of acknowledgement when her work exceeded expectations, and the quiet patience with which he explained things she struggled to learn. Horseback riding became a ritual, each outing a mixture of instruction and casual conversation. Daniel, who had been distant and measured, began to open in small, deliberate ways, sharing observations about the ranch, the seasons, and even glimpses of his life before tragedy struck. The children, ever perceptive, began to notice the shifts as well. Sophie, who had once regarded Clara with thinly veiled suspicion, now sought her guidance with sewing projects or schoolwork. Luke, the quiet skeptic, allowed her to ride alongside him when tending the livestock, trusting her judgment and learning from her gentle encouragement. Emma's laughter became a frequent presence, ringing across the yard as she showed Clara the small wonders of a child's world: wildflowers, tiny insects, and the way sunlight played across the barn beams. Evenings became moments of quiet intimacy between Clara and Daniel. After the day's labors, they would often find themselves lingering in the kitchen, Clara washing dishes while Daniel cleaned tools or repaired fences. Conversations began to flow more easily. Daniel shared stories of the ranch's history, of triumphs and failures alike, while Clara spoke of her past in measured tones, careful not to overshare but eager to connect. There was a rhythm to these moments, a gentle weaving together of lives that had begun as strangers' paths and were slowly forming into a shared journey. It was not always easy. Frustrations flared, broken fences, misbehaving animals, and miscommunications tested their patience, but even these moments strengthened their bond. Clara learned to anticipate Daniel's expectations, to read the subtle signals in his posture or tone, while Daniel began to respect her instincts and her judgments. They became, in essence, a team reliant on one another's strengths, forgiving one another's mistakes, and navigating the daily challenges of ranch life side by side. One late afternoon, a sudden storm swept across the fields, sending Clara and Daniel racing to secure the animals and tie down loose equipment. Mud clung to their boots, rain soaked their clothes, and the wind threatened to tear away the very structures they had worked so hard to maintain. Yet, in the chaos, they moved together with ease, Daniel issuing calm directions, Clara responding without hesitation. When at last they stood in the doorway of the barn, dripping wet but victorious, there was a moment of shared laughter, a spark of connection that transcended the practical tasks of the day. That night, as the children slept soundly in their beds, Clara lingered on the porch, the storm having passed and the stars emerging overhead. Daniel joined her, standing a respectful distance away. Neither spoke immediately, yet the quiet companionship felt charged with understanding. They had come to rely on one another, not just for practical survival, but for emotional support, trust, and an unspoken bond that was slowly transforming into something deeper. Clara realized, as she watched Daniel against the backdrop of the starlit sky, that this mutual dependence had become the foundation of her new life. Here on this ranch, with its challenges and its small joys, she had found not only purpose but the beginnings of a connection that promised something more, something neither of them could yet name, but both would come to feel in ways that would change them forever. The morning air carried a tension Clara had not felt before. Storm clouds loomed on the horizon, heavy and dark, but it was not the weather that set her nerves on edge. A man from a neighboring town had arrived unannounced, his horse kicking up dust as he approached the McAllister ranch with an air of authority that bordered on menace. Clara instinctively moved closer to Daniel, who met the stranger at the gate with a calm, steady gaze, though she could sense the subtle tightening of his jaw. "Daniel McAllister," the man said, his tone sharp and clipped. "I hear you've been skirting certain debts. That farm of yours, if you don't settle up, there'll be consequences." He looked past Daniel, his eyes lingering on Clara and the children as if assessing them for weakness. The underlying threat was unmistakable, and Clara felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. This was no ordinary challenge. This was a direct attack on the family she had come to care for. Daniel's response was measured but firm. "This is my property and my responsibility. We'll handle our affairs without interference." His voice carried authority, but Clara could see the tension in his posture. The stranger sneered, clearly expecting a confrontation, but Daniel's calm refusal to engage further seemed to disarm him, if only momentarily. Still, Clara sensed that danger lingered, a shadow that could touch their lives in ways they could not yet predict. The children, previously sheltered within the safety of their routines, sensed the tension immediately. Sophie hovered near Daniel, her protective instincts flaring, while Luke's eyes darted nervously, calculating risks he was too young to manage fully. Emma clutched Clara's hand tightly, her small body trembling. Clara felt an overwhelming surge of responsibility, realizing that she was not only expected to manage the household, but now to act as a shield for these children against real-world threats. As the day progressed, the storm clouds moved closer and the neighbors' threats became more insistent. Supplies were stolen from the barn, minor sabotage left the animals agitated, and the overall sense of danger intensified. Clara found herself at the center of the chaos, coordinating efforts with Daniel to secure the ranch, calm the children, and protect their property. She took charge of feeding the animals, barricading weak fences, and keeping the children calm, while Daniel handled the larger physical threats with quiet authority. By late afternoon, the storm broke not just in weather but in action. A sudden downpour flooded parts of the pasture, and one of the younger horses broke free in the panic. Clara acted instinctively, racing through the mud and rain, shouting instructions to Daniel and the children. Together they managed to corral the animal, prevent further injury, and secure the barn. The shared struggle brought them closer, their teamwork seamless, unspoken, and instinctual. When the rain finally subsided, Clara and Daniel stood soaked, exhausted, and muddy, yet victorious. The children rushed to them, their relief and admiration evident in their bright, wet faces. Sophie threw herself into Clara's arms, Luke grinned despite his wet clothes, and Emma hugged them both, laughter bubbling over. In that moment, Clara realized the depth of her connection to this family, not just in affection, but in shared resilience and trust forged under pressure. Later, as they sat by the fire, drying off and warming their chilled bodies, Daniel spoke in a quieter, more reflective tone than she had ever heard. "You handled yourself well today," he said, his eyes meeting hers with something more than approval, something like awe. "I didn't expect it, but you were." Remarkable. Clara felt a flush of pride, but more than that, a sense of belonging. She was no longer merely a caretaker or an outsider. She was a partner in every sense, someone Daniel could rely on when danger threatened, someone the children could look to for strength. The threat had tested them, and in surviving it together, something unspoken had shifted. Trust had become something tangible, a bond stronger than words, binding Clara, Daniel, and the children into a family that had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. And as Clara watched the firelight dance across Daniel's face, she knew that what they had survived today was only the beginning of the life they would face together, resilient, united, and unbreakable. The morning after the storm, the ranch felt different, lighter, almost reborn. The chaos of the previous day had tested everyone, but it had also revealed strengths and vulnerabilities that could no longer be ignored. Clara moved through the kitchen preparing breakfast, her hands steady as she flipped pancakes and poured coffee, but her mind replayed the events of the day before. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and physical exhaustion, and yet, in the process, she had discovered a courage and resilience within herself she hadn't known existed. The children entered one by one, rubbing sleep from their eyes, their expressions softer than they had been in weeks. Sophie approached Clara first, a small smile breaking through her usually guarded demeanor. "Thanks for yesterday," she said quietly. I didn't know anyone could handle it like that." Clara felt warmth flood her chest. These words, simple as they were, meant more than any praise she could imagine. Luke and Emma echoed her sentiments in their own ways, Luke with a tentative nod and a shy "good job," Emma with a hug that spoke volumes in its silent affection. Clara realized that trust had been earned and a fragile sense of family had taken root. Daniel entered the kitchen, his presence calm but commanding, the familiar weight of responsibility in his gaze softened by something new, a vulnerability he seldom allowed himself to show. He watched Clara for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "I need to apologize," he began, voice low and steady. "I haven't always made things easy for you, and I know the children can be difficult." but you've proven yourself in ways I didn't expect. You're not just capable, you're remarkable." His words were deliberate, carrying a depth of feeling that Clara hadn't heard before. She met his gaze, seeing for the first time the man beneath the rancher, the widower who had grieved, who had feared, and who now stood before her willing to show trust and admiration. Clara swallowed hard, the weight of unspoken emotions pressing against her chest. I've only tried to do my best," she said softly, her voice trembling with a mix of humility and growing confidence. "I care about this family, about all of you. And I want to help, not because I have to, but because I choose to." The sincerity in her words seemed to touch something deep within Daniel. His eyes softened, and for the first time, Clara saw him unguarded, open in a way that spoke of trust and perhaps something more. The children, sensing the gravity of the moment, gathered around. Sophie's arms slipped around Clara's shoulders in an unspoken acknowledgement of acceptance. Luke leaned against Daniel, seeking reassurance, while Emma climbed into Clara's lap, her small fingers clutching hers tightly. In this simple, domestic tableau, the barriers between them had melted, replaced by mutual love and reliance. Clara realized that the family she had feared she could never truly join now welcomed her fully, without pretense or hesitation. Later, as the day gave way to evening, Daniel and Clara sat on the porch, the children playing nearby, laughter mingling with the soft evening breeze. "I've been afraid," Daniel admitted quietly, voice barely above the wind. "Afraid of losing control, afraid of failing them. And I didn't know how to let anyone in." Clara reached out, placing her hand gently over his. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," she said. "You have me, and we'll face everything together." For the first time, the weight of fear and uncertainty lifted. They spoke honestly about their feelings, their hopes, and the vulnerabilities they had kept hidden. In revealing these truths, they found not only connection but liberation. The children, witnessing these moments of honesty and warmth, felt the same sense of safety and belonging they had craved for so long. By nightfall, the McAllister Ranch was no longer just a house, nor was Clara merely a newcomer. They had become a true family, bound by trust, courage, and love. And as the stars shimmered overhead, each of them, Clara, Daniel, Sophie, Luke, and Emma, knew that their lives, once uncertain and fragile, were now intertwined in a bond stronger than any storm or challenge the world could bring. The morning sun rose gently over the McAllister Ranch, bathing the sprawling fields in a warm, golden light. Clara stood on the porch, sipping her coffee, her gaze sweeping across the land that had once felt so foreign and daunting. Now it felt like home, vivid, alive, and full of the promise that hard work and love could nurture. The children's laughter drifted from the yard as they ran and played, their voices mingling with the soft lowing of cows and the rhythmic clatter of horseshoes on dirt. Clara felt a profound sense of peace. This was the life she had feared and yet longed for, a life she had helped build with her own hands. Daniel approached, his broad figure silhouetted against the morning sun. There was a subtle ease to his movement, a quiet confidence that came not only from managing the ranch, but from the trust and connection he shared with Clara. He stopped beside her on the porch, offering a small smile that carried the weight of unspoken understanding. The hardships, the storms, the whispers, and the dangers, they had all forged something unbreakable between them. "You're up early," Daniel said softly, a teasing note in his voice that Clara had come to recognize as rare and meaningful. She glanced at him and smiled. "Some habits are hard to break," she replied. Her eyes sparkled with amusement, but beneath the lightheartedness was a deeper acknowledgement of how far she had come. She no longer felt like a hesitant outsider. She was part of this family, part of this ranch, and part of Daniel's life in a way that felt both natural and profound. The children bounded up to them, breathless and muddy from their morning play. Sophie flopped down onto the porch steps with a laugh, Luke clutched a stick like a sword, and Emma tugged at Clara's hand. begging to show her a new discovery in the garden. Clara knelt to meet them, her arms wrapping around each in turn. Their laughter, their joy, and their affection were tangible proof of the family she had helped nurture. Each child had come to trust and love her not as an intruder or a replacement for their mother, but as someone who was steady, reliable, and kind. Daniel watched them for a moment, his gaze softened by something deeper than pride. It was wonder, admiration, and an acknowledgement that this life, complicated and unpredictable, had become a shared dream realized. "They're happy," he murmured, almost to himself. "Because of you," Clara shook her head, laughing softly. "Because of all of us," she said. And it was true. Together they had created a home, a sanctuary where love, patience, and courage overcame fear and uncertainty. The day unfolded with quiet joy. Clara and Daniel worked side by side in the fields, their movements in harmony, their conversation light and easy. The children assisted, learning the ways of the ranch while feeling the security and freedom of a family united. The stormy days of the past, the gossip, the threats, the fear of rejection felt distant, replaced by a present full of life and hope. Each success, each shared smile, reinforced the sense that they were stronger together than apart. As evening approached, the family gathered on the porch once more. The sky blazed in shades of pink and gold, reflecting the warmth that now existed between them. Daniel slipped his hand into Clara's, a simple gesture that carried the promise of commitment, partnership, and love. The children leaned against them, content and secure, knowing their world was stable and that their family was whole. For Clara, the journey from a frightened 18-year-old girl to the heart of a loving household had been arduous, but it had brought rewards beyond measure. She had earned trust, forged bonds, and found love in the most unexpected of places. The McAllister Ranch was more than land and buildings. It was a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of human connection. And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Clara, Daniel, Sophie, Luke, and Emma looked out over their home together, hearts full, spirits unbroken, and the future wide open. For the first time in her life, Clara felt entirely certain of one thing. She had arrived, not just at a home, but at a beginning that promised a lifetime of love, family, and belonging.